Welcome to 3-Minute Gestalt, Unit 28, Ethics and Applications in Clinical Practice. So ethics is a huge topic. Gestalt has particular things to say about it. Obviously, there's been a big evolution in terms of our understanding and thinking about ethics from the early 20th century right through to the 21st century, and issues such as sex with clients have, particularly since the 1970s, really been reviewed and sort of put beyond the pale in terms of what's acceptable, although the research shows that hasn't made a huge dent in the amount of ethical breaches which occur, but nevertheless, at least the profession itself has taken a clear stance and provides more education, particularly in the training of therapists and of course those bodies which review complaints and such. So there's obvious ethical boundaries such as that. But I'm more interested in talking about what does Gestalt particularly have to contribute to an understanding of ethics. And of course, there's different ethical systems, and without really going into the sort of philosophy of those, basically ethics can become, in some ways, a moralistic type of framework about what you should do and what you shouldn't do and what's right and what's wrong. But human relationships tend to be a little more complex than that, although we can say, well, it's not healthy to have sex with your clients. That's very clear in black and white. Above and beyond that, there's a lot of judgment which needs to be exercised. And unfortunately, some of the kind of ethical approaches to psychotherapy in contemporary times tend to be fairly prescriptive, and although they might provide different scenarios about, well, in this dilemma, what would you do? The general consensus is pretty much, well, you should maintain your boundaries and basic things. But the interpretation of what that means sometimes has an overbearing presence of the industry. And what I think is important from a Gestalt point of view, because we don't like to operate by shoulds, we like to find what's true for me, and we encourage our clients to do that. And then it's also important for therapists to do that. And just because a profession says something, or even supervisors say something, not that we just throw the baby out with the bathwater, in Gestalt, we consider everything needs to be chewed over and digested and integrated into who you are. So that it also includes the issue of the ethics of practice of therapy. So I think from a Gestalt point of view, it's encouraged for each therapist to examine their own values. Yes, there's industry values and standards and social standards and laws, and all that's important to understand and know about. What's equally important, though, is knowing who you are, what your values are, where you are around flexibility or rigidity of boundaries, because there are spectrums from a strict classical psychoanalytic, you don't have any pictures on your walls and nothing that can, give away anything about your identity, through to perhaps a more open-ended Gestalt approach where I'm happy to have my pictures on my walls or a photo of my family up or whatever it is. I don't think that interferes with the therapy. In fact, I think it can enhance it by making me more of a person, and I'm happy to include with transparency as appropriate to the needs of the client myself in the therapeutic relationship. So there's a range of spectrum of attitudes and ideas about what's appropriate in terms of boundaries and contact and what's helpful with clients and not. So with all of this in Gestalt, we really want to come back to me, to you, to what are your values, to really examining those values and to crafting your own ethical framework, etc., not just wholesale adopting one from the industry. The other thing I'll say about Gestalt is that it's oriented towards a type of ethics which is called situational ethics, which does not mean, completely relativistic, but it does mean that in each situation we examine afresh, as it were, although it's more work, what are the ethics of this situation? What are my needs? What are the client's needs? What are the appropriate boundaries? So it's an orientation that's not so much top down as in Gestalt terms, emerges out of the situation. And sometimes the ethic itself will emerge clearly from the situation and less from thinking about it, and more from noticing and observing and entering into real contact and real dialogue. And this is the kind of ethical approach that we particularly like to take in Gestalt. It's a little bit rebellious in a way, because it doesn't just say follow what you're supposed to. It says look at the actual circumstance, look at the actual situation and see, perhaps, there's industry standards about the boundaries of therapy, and it should take place within an office, a clinical office, and with a receptionist and staff, and, but then there's other perspectives that say sometimes for some clients it's good to go for a walk in a park with them, or sit on a train with them, or, lots of other possibilities in which therapy might be practiced that are outside of the normal frame. And of course, that takes a risk, and at the same time, it can also be a benefit to the client. So that's our primary interest, is really what's beneficial to the relationship. And that's the kind of core ethic of Gestalt.